This comparative analysis will examine the similar and disparate cinematic intentionalities of Wings of Fame and Wings of Desire, both of which aim to discuss themes of humanity, the afterlife, and meaning through the cultural lenses of a 1960s through 1980s England and a rapidly changing 1980s Berlin, respectively. Both works elicit from the viewer personal reflection on the question, in what ways does a surreal, varying planal perspective, in life versus beyond life, shape the audience's understanding of cultural attitudes toward experience versus perception in finding meaning? Wings of Fame, directed by Otokar Votocek in 1990 and set in England in the 1960s, follows obscure author Brian who finds himself in a purgatorial afterlife hotel where famous souls reside with the actor he murdered, Caesar, for stealing his work. In it, Votocek explores a dilemma apropos of the 80s and into the 90s. At the end of our lives, how meaningful is it that we are known? While traceable to the 1940s and gradually increasing over time, the Western world in the 1980s and 1990s saw a dramatic increase in the loss of anonymity and a prevalence of celebrity culture. What with media fragmentation and innovation like MTV, blockbuster culture, tabloids, and commercial consolidation under conglomerates. In his book Time Passages, Professor George Lipsitz comments, "The 80s saw a tremendous emphasis on surface appearances. There was real emphasis on visual imagery calling attention to itself. This produced an environment in which fulfillment was found in social perception and credit that parallels that of the film's hotel." The parallel film, Wings of Desire, was filmed in 1988 by director Wim Wnders and tells the story of the angel Damiel carrying out his duties of comforting the distressed population of Berlin, all while invisible and wishing to experience humanity for himself. 1988 was a year before the Berlin Wall fell. In the West, ideals of rebellion, total freedom, and unity flourished, while the East saw the continued oppression of its citizens under a restrictive communist regime. Damiel's pain, in the first half of Wings of Desire, mirrors that of East Berlin. Looking in on a bustling population live their lives freely, close and yet on a completely separate plane. Clara Lunau describes the difference between her father's experience in East Berlin and her experience in the article A Personal Account About Life Under the Dictatorship of the GDR. When I ask my father about his life in East Berlin and his time in prison, he freely answers, "To me, it will always remain as something unbelievable. I was born in 1990, but this very same city, just a couple of years ago, had imprisoned my father for the simple reason of wanting to leave." How close the camera is positioned with relation to the protagonist, and therefore how their surrounding environment feels to the viewer, is a seminal technique used throughout both films. In varying the audience's spatial awareness through camera work, Wings of Desire and Wings of Fame control how palpable the surreality of the afterlife plane both protagonists populate is, and conversely, how real their eventual humanity ends up feeling. This sets the stage for both films ultimately privileging experience over perception as the source of meaning. In Wings of Fame, the hotel scenes are often shown in wider or mid-shots, sometimes using deep focus for tableau-like compositions that mimic the liminality of M.C. Escher, creating distance between the protagonist and his environment and reinforcing the surreal absurdity of the hotel's fame obsession and atmosphere. Camera work subtextually emphasizes perception over personal experience, where Brian doesn't seem able to completely interact with his environment. In rare moments of connection, like with his love interest Bianca, closer angles are used, up until the film's end where both Brian and Caesar are given the opportunity to live again. In that final scene, the composition is close, unconstructed and simple, with no physical or symbolic distance between the characters and their environment forced by the camera. His meaning is found not in being perceived by others as the hotel had imposed, but by experiencing life for himself. Dr. Jordan Grumet's description of this fame illusion outlines that fame can tempt us into confusing our meaning with goals. When we lack meaning, when our internal story or true selves feel incomplete or unworthy, fame can look like the perfect solution. Once I'm famous, we think, I'll finally feel good enough. The hotel is full of people who died in this pursuit, when cultivation of the internal story or true self in anonymity is often where fulfillment and meaning really lies. In Wings of Desire, Damiel is initially observed from a distance through wide, elevated, or aerial shots, often hovering above the streets of Berlin or framing the city that emphasize his separation from human life. This creates a sense of detachment in his role as an immortal observer. He can see and comfort humans, but cannot fully participate in their experience. Moments of closer framing are when Damiel experiences fleeting intimacy with individuals, such as when he watches his love interest, Marion, perform. As the film progresses and Damiel chooses to become human, the camera shifts to tighter, closer shots that immerse the audience in his perspective and allow him to engage fully with his environment. In these final sequences, the compositions are naturalistic and immediate, visually reinforcing that his fulfillment is derived from direct, lived experience rather than detached observation. The physical and visual construction of each film's environments is central to how meaning is communicated. Both Wings of Fame and Wings of Desire manipulate the mise-en-scène to differentiate between planes of existence, with liminal artificial spaces representing the afterlife or immortal perspective, and naturalistic spaces after being given life. This distinction highlights that meaning is generated not through observation or status, but through earnest interaction with the real world. In Wings of Fame, the hotel is a highly constructed, almost theatrical environment. All aspects of the physical space are intentional, in a sense performative. Hallways, staircases, and communal spaces are precise, with dramatic lighting and exaggerated decor that mirrors the facade of fame kept up by the hotel's residents and management. Characters' sense of self and meaning is mediated through social perception. The hotel is a stage where status and notoriety dominate, and the space itself reinforces this artificiality. When Brian and Caesar re-enter society, no part of the diner they walk into is constructed or intentional. It is completely authentic. Similarly, in Wings of Desire, Berlin is depicted with varying levels of construction and liminality. In his angelic state, Damiel observes the city through carefully composed shots, stations, rooftops, and interior spaces framed with meticulous geometry, heightened lighting, and ambitious angles, giving the audience a chance to look through at the world from a transcendent layer above reality like Damiel. These visual constructions mark his separation from human experience, as the angels observe rather than actively participate in the city. And indeed, liminality is often cited as common in art in times of cultural shift, as liminality points to in-between situations and conditions where established structures are dislocated. The liminal marks the passage of a subject through a cultural realm that has few or none of the attributes of the past or coming state. The liminality of Berlin mirrors its uncanny and unpredictable nature toward the end of the German Democratic Republic, and is broken when Damiel becomes human. The mise-en-scène shifts to naturalistic streets, cafes, and rehearsal spaces, where light, texture, and movement feel unmanipulated and accessible. Damiel's engagement with these spaces is joyful when he's given the chance to, suggesting that meaning emerges from active participation rather than distant observation. Both films use characters of real-life notoriety, a plethora of literary and historical figures like Ernest Hemingway residing in the hotel in Wings of Fame, and the real-life Peter Falk playing himself in Wings of Desire. In Wings of Fame, the characters' status are their identities, and are inseparable from how others perceive them. While not all of them might have chased fame and life as their sole pursuit, once they move on to a plane in which human experience is no longer available, it becomes their only significant attribute. Devoid of that human experience, the character's isolated focus on social perception sours into extreme vanity, festering even further into a collective madness that drives both Brian and Caesar out and back to life. Wings of Fame frames obsession with fame as a foil of perception because it is a denial of authentic human experience, even as it comes with anonymity, as both Brian and Caesar come to know. In Wings of Desire, Peter Falk is a recurring character whose fame is played for symbolic irony and humor. While he is famous, recognized on the street for his real-life television show Columbo, it doesn't seem to matter to him, in that he is not consigned to only being perceived. He roams the streets of Berlin, frequents hot dog stands, and sketches the people around him. He finds meaning by striking a balance between being perceived and perceiving. He surrenders himself to authentic human experience, which requires both. In his conversation with Damiel, he admits that he was once an angel, but just as Damiel, he forfeited his title so as to become human. Peter Falk describes to Damiel some of Earth's simple pleasures. Even he was unsatisfied, and took the path to humanity that Damiel would, emphasizing that being consigned to one extreme of perception inhibits one's ability to find meaning inherently. Critic Richard Raskin notes the effect Peter Falk's inclusion as himself has on the audience. He enjoys our confidence because we know him as Columbo and as the actor Peter Falk. For the first time, we can feel without reserve that what Damiel is giving up to become immortal is more than counterbalanced by what he will gain. Damiel will never regret becoming immortal, since Falk, 30 years after his own transformation, radiates fulfillment and well-being. Just as with Wings of Fame, both characters begin at one of these extremes and become increasingly distressed and unsatisfied until they find fulfillment through exploring the other, thereby striking a balance in human experience. Together, the works form an image that is beneficial when comparing the time and place in which they were produced. Wings of Fame, filmed in 1990 at a time when the Western world celebrity culture was booming, explores the foil of solely being perceived. Wings of Desire, filmed in Berlin at a time where one half of Berlin was still under oppression, is an exploration of how only perception, forced only to observe the lives of others, is ultimately unfulfilling. Meaning then, according to both films, lies in unobsessed and uninhibited experience.